How to approach learning jazz standards is the topic of today's vlog. Now, there's many ways you can approach learning a piece of music, a jazz standard, and I thought I'd share my 6 stages that I go through with trying to learn and commit a jazz standard to memory. And the first thing I do is very simple, very obvious, but I think some people neglect this step, and it is just to listen to as many versions as possible. 2 chief reasons for doing this is to kind of internalize the sound of the melody, try to get to the point where I could hum it or sing it. And the second thing, to get a feel for those chords, any interesting moments in it, any interesting changes, or just how quickly the chords change, and getting a sense of the harmonic rhythm of those. I listened to as many versions as possible. I tried to seek out what some people might regard as the iconic versions. I often consult this book, The Jazz Standards by Ted Gioia, not sure how you pronounce that surname, but 250 standards in here that he talks about their kind of interesting points, who wrote them, and background to the song, and he has suggested listening, and I always like to check out those. And this listening stage is really important. It gives me a chance to get that melody into my head. Can I get to the point where I can remember that melody, I could hum it, I could sing it before I've even attempted to play it? You get a feel for the sense of the chord changes, how quickly the chords change, any interesting changes in harmony. You might not know what they are necessarily when you're listening to them, but you're going, oh, that bit's interesting, before you've even picked up your guitar. This stage is really important and not one to skip, and it's a great foundation from which you can really develop a thorough knowledge of a standard. Now, each year I create my own private playlist on Spotify, where I'll put, standards 2021, whatever year it might be, and I will add versions of the standards I'm learning as I go throughout the year. That'd be the sort of thing I listen to when I'm driving in the car, and again, gives me further opportunities to really cement the sound of the chord changes and the melody. The second stage I do in different ways depending on how much time I have that week or that day, how complex the standard or how simple the standard is. And it's either to do one or two things, either work out that melody and the chords by ear, or to look at a lead sheet, so something like the real book. And remembering, if I go that second route with the real book, those lead sheets aren't always right. The versions that you like might not follow exactly the way the melody is phrased or the chord voicings, and there can be many differences between the way a standard looks on a page and subsequent recordings of it. If I use the real book, it's just a guide and not something set in stone. Now, that first way will yield much better results in your long-term development. So if you work things out by ear, it's going to have an overall payoff in terms of your ear training, your ability to find melodies on the guitar and distinguish between chord types and chord movements. But it is obviously a slower process. So the third stage, either I've worked out the melody and chords by ear, or I've got them from the real book or other sources. What I would then do is obviously get down to playing that. Now, if it comes to the melody, I try and play it in different places on the neck. Might then try and find it in different places on the guitar. Might try and do that, or even as octaves. I want to get to that point where I can remember that melody. Now, when I mean remember, I don't necessarily mean, A, D, C, D, C, or even 2, 5, fret numbers. I don't want to think like that, or string names. I just try to think of the sound and try to remember the sound, because that's much more useful to me and it's transferable across the neck. But for you, that would just depend, what your ear's like and also your fretboard knowledge. So the aim here is to be able to play that melody to a backing track in time. I think if you've got a strong grasp with the melody, the chords are much easier to learn and hear, because the melodies are often well linked to the chord changes, and you can play a melody and kind of hear the changes without the chords being played. So it helps. The two support each other, obviously. And when it comes to comping, I would start out with very vanilla versions of the chords. So just take that tune. And I obviously have to make decisions about what chord voicings I use, where I play it on the fretboard, whether I use drop 2, drop 3, or 3-note voicings or 4-note voicings. There's obviously many options, but I just get the basic vanilla ideas down first. As I progress with it, I might try and be more creative, and try and do more interesting things to those chords. But you've got to be able to get through them, ideally from memory, without any big gaps between your chord changes, and obviously without any open strings ringing, and a good sense of the rhythm and timing. Now, stage 4 is something that I wish I'd started doing much sooner, and that's to play a song in another key. You could potentially play it in all keys, which would be really great. And when I think back to the standards I've been working on over the last year, the ones that I've got down best are the ones I've done in other keys. It takes some discipline, and I can think, back at the start of the year when I'm super disciplined with my practice, I can remember doing lots and lots of this. I'm still doing it at the moment, but not as much as I would like, and it's something I need to go, oh, I've got to do this in other keys, but sometimes it does come down to time, which I'm sure you can relate to. Now, you could do this in a couple of ways. The first way, you could take an app like iReal Pro. This is by no ways a sponsored video or anything, by the way. This is just an app a lot of jazz guitar players and jazz musicians use. Say I find A Fine Romance by Jerome Kern. Chords are on here. It says the key of C. I can just click on the key and change it to any key, and it will transpose the chords into my chosen key like that. So it doesn't require any effort or work from me as such. If you're not used to transposing and changing things into other keys, that might be a good way to do it for now. The way to get the most from it in the long run, something to aim towards doing, is to work it out without the aid of technology. And to be able to do that, taking that progression from earlier, you have to know how these chords are working, I think, to be able to do that. Knowing that this is chord 1, this is a diminished, a flat 2 or sharp 1 diminished, and then it's a 2, and then it's the 5. If I then change to the key of A, I know from what chords are in different keys that I can work out that's A, and then B flat diminished, and B minor 7 to E7, and that's obviously reliant upon harmonic knowledge, which you develop over time the more you play jazz standards. Trying to do the melody in this way, because it's not going to be written out in tab or in your real book, that's going to be much harder. Now, I think it's brilliant for developing the ear, because you just think about the sound. Going back to my melodic example from earlier, in the typical key, it was da 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 da. So if I go to A, just think of this, rather than I could work out the intervals and stuff, I'm just going to think. Obviously, depends on your knowledge of intervals and where those sounds are on the fretboard, but that's how I would work out the melody in another key. I wouldn't do it by trying to transpose sheet music or something like that. It's just use your ear. The points so far have been about having a thorough and not having a superficial understanding of a standard. I can think of a whole load of standards I have a very superficial understanding of. Why do I have a superficial understanding of them? Because I've learnt them from a real book, or I've not worked on them enough, I've not done enough with them, I've not made enough attempts to understand them, I've not listened to them enough. But all of those points and my suggestions really have been about a thorough knowledge of a standard from memory, by the sound, understanding of the chords, and really internalizing. Like, you should be able to whistle, hum, sing the melody of a standard as easily as you can. Happy birthday, you've got it then. And this might mean working on less standards. Maybe instead of doing one standard every week, or trying to do several even, maybe just one a month would be a better way to do this. It all depends on how much time you have to dedicate towards practice. 4 stages so far, and we haven't even talked about soloing. Why? Because I think if you're going to solo well, effectively over changes, you need the above. You need the melody down really well, you need the chords internalized. Otherwise you'll be clinging on for trying to think, what's that next chord, when you're improvising, and it will sound like you don't know it. Now, step 5 would be tentative steps into soloing, and I do 1 or 2 things. Vary the melody. Take this. I could go, or very, similar it's slightly different. You still hear this sort of melody, and quite often when you listen to jazz recordings, the first solo someone does kind of alludes to the head. Sometimes it can be just a very simple variations upon it. So that's a good step into soloing. But probably one of the things I often find myself doing is just simply outlining the chord tones. So I will simply, try and play quarter notes and go. And that's just, the chord tones of F major 7, then F sharp diminished 7th, G minor 7, C7. I do that up, down, and then do things like try and connect to the nearest chord tone at the point of change. So I might dig out just the thirds and the sevenths. Useful notes to find. Going through a progression like that, to begin with out of time and then in time, maybe working up towards eighth notes and varying the rhythm and things like that, again, is about internalizing the sound of the chords. It's not about playing a solo, it's about getting a sense of the pulls, the harmonic pulls, like I've talked about on my videos before, of where the notes in the chords collide and want to lead. The final stage, stage 6, is about memory and retention. My aim for the standards which I want to play and like to play is to know, as I said, the chords and the melody from memory. I find if I don't know the melody very well, then my memory of the chords is compromised, and then it leads to compromised soloing or overly thought out soloing because I'm not sure of the next change. I don't know how or why we get ourselves into these positions of trying to solo over chord changes when we haven't memorized the chord changes or we don't know them well enough. It seems strange to me. So this is about repertoire maintenance, and this is about, you know, in your practice, not always playing the newest standard you've been working on. And part of a balanced practice routine should, you know, you should have almost like a set list of your go-to standards, the ones that you want to maintain. And that issue of playing from memory might be quite a challenging step to take, but it's an incredibly rewarding step to take. What it does for me is it frees me up to think more musically, not to think about stuff that sits on a page, because as soon as you've got a page there, you're absorbed in that, and I think the sound becomes less of a thing. You know, your eyes are just glued to it, and this, I don't know about the, you know, like this idea of if you take away a sense, it heightens other senses. Well, I think in this instance, when you've got the music in front of you, it diminishes the other senses, I think. And I think you'll play with much deeper connection to the music if you play without the music. Obviously, there's a time for sheet music in terms of arrangements, particularly in things like big bands and, you know, big settings like that. But I never forget once going to a gig at a local jazz club, guys on a stage, 3 guitar players, 3 music stands, 3 big folders, and throughout the whole gig I could see feet and hair and then music stands. As you can imagine, it was pretty boring to watch and listen to. So that was my 6 stages. Those 6 stages take a while, but they lead to, I think, better long-term results. So let me know if you think I'm missing anything out in my process and if there's any other steps or steps you think you take away, you know, because ultimately you've got to have a system that works for you, and you might take parts of other people's ideas, blend them with your own, and develop your own way of doing it. But I think it's good to have a system and an approach to doing it so that your practice can be as productive as possible. Thanks so much for watching today's video. Leave me a comment, hit that like button. Join me every Wednesday and Saturday for jazz guitar lessons. I'll put a couple videos up on the screen that you might want to check out for myself. Join me every Wednesday and Saturday for jazz guitar lessons. Until next time, you take care.